Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. The rain had been falling for hours, fine as ash, settling on slate rooftops and curling into the roots of hedgerows that bordered the old path. Light hadn't disappeared, but it had thinned, drawn long across the hills like a breath held too long. The garden behind the cottage had taken on that muted color it sometimes did in late spring, when everything looked washed twice, once by weather, once by silence. She stood barefoot in the mud, dress hemmed dark with water, arms slack at her sides. Lips moved. Not in play, not in song, but with cadence. Rhythm that wasn't childish, wasn't improvised. Words came in bursts, segmented and controlled, like lines rehearsed and remembered from someplace unreachable. Her mother called once from the kitchen window. No answer. Just the same sound from the garden, those syllables, rolling and clipped, rising with purpose. The woman dried her hands on her apron, opened the back door. Stop. That voice did not belong to a child. It had weight, form. Not mimicry, authority. In the hedgerow, the birds had gone still. Even the rain seemed to hush in the pauses between the phrases. At the edge of the garden, an old cassette recorder sat propped against a stone, the red eye of the record button glowing. It had been left there the day before, forgotten after some lesson or game. No one had touched it. The tape inside had clicked on without a hand. The reels turned slowly, magnetizing each word as if the machine itself had decided something needed remembering. One word repeated twice. Long vowels, throat-heavy consonant. She turned her face toward the sky, eyes unfocused, mouth still shaping the term, again and again. The light changed. Not darkness, more a pulling away of warmth, like the sun had retreated behind something thicker than cloud. From the door, the mother stepped forward, stopped again. Her voice caught in her throat, not out of fear, but from the impossibility of the moment. A memory surfaced. A story from her grandmother, spoken once in a whisper and never again. A tale with no ending, only a phrase passed down with no meaning. The phrase was on the tape, word for word. From the garden, the child turned at last. Not to look, not to respond, only to continue, as if the air itself asked the question and she alone had been permitted to answer. He hadn't intended to listen past the first minute. The file arrived through a former student, forwarded twice before reaching his inbox. No subject line. No context. Just an audio clip titled with a date and coordinate. The voice on the recording wasn't the kind typically sent for analysis. It didn't drift into babble, didn't break into sing-song. It carried structure. More than that, it carried intent. In the study lined with dictionaries no one had opened in years, the sound played low through tinny speakers. He leaned forward, rewound, listened again. A pattern repeated itself. Not in the content, but in the mechanics. Noun stems modified by what sounded like ergative shifts, subject-object reversals that required more than imitation. There were recursive loops, self-contained utterances nested within larger grammatical clauses, the kind no child should be capable of without immersion in a system. A living system. Yet there was no known analog. No genetic link to anything living or extinct. No alignment to recorded tongues, not even the fringe constructs that sometimes passed for language on obscure forums. This wasn't invention. It was precision. It disturbed him more than it intrigued him. He checked the date stamp again. The recording had been made 2 months earlier in a rural classroom less than 3 hours away. He didn't sleep that night. In the morning, he drove. The school looked like dozens he had passed during his career. Windows framed in peeling white paint, flag limp in a breeze that carried the smell of something turned over in the soil. He parked, ignored the administrator waiting at the door, and walked straight into the staff room where a teacher named Owens waited beside a box of file folders and a mug gone cold. The girl wasn't present. He hadn't expected her to be. The voice in the clip played again from a phone. He stopped it before the second phrase. "You heard this in person?" His voice had gone quiet without him realizing. The teacher nodded once. It wasn't just sound, the teacher said carefully. It felt like language. Felt. Not sounded. Felt. He understood immediately. The recordings were longer than expected. Some with clear repetition. Others with variance so subtle it required waveform analysis. One section used tone to disambiguate clause hierarchy. Another introduced what appeared to be numerical inflection, numbers not through symbols, but through position and stress. It had taken him years to identify anything remotely similar in dying dialects, and even those collapsed under scrutiny. This child did it naturally. He stayed in the village longer than planned. Each afternoon brought another session. Sometimes the child spoke without prompting, sometimes not at all. No translation was offered. No mimicry. Only that calm, inflected rhythm, as if reading from memory too old to forget. During one session, she paused in the middle of a clause, looked directly at him without blinking, and whispered a term he hadn't heard on any tape. He wrote it down, phoneme by phoneme. That night, he found it etched into a tablet fragment buried in a forgotten museum archive from an excavation abandoned 30 years ago. It had never been translated. The annotation beside it read, "Presumed proper name or divine title, origin unknown." He returned to the school the next morning with 3 notebooks. No questions. Just a request. He asked to continue the recordings. Not for research. Not for publication. For understanding. There was something in her syntax that left no room for pretense. She wasn't speaking for attention. She wasn't playing. She was remembering something no one else had ever been taught. The wind across the Anatolian plateau had no direction that day. Dust rose without rhythm, clinging to the scaffolding and tarps that lined the perimeter of the excavation. By the time the lower strata revealed stonework unfamiliar to the region, the lead archaeologist had already exhausted his original thesis. He called it ornamental, ritualistic at best. Until the chamber gave way. It wasn't a collapse. Not exactly. The stone broke inward without pressure, as if something beneath had been waiting without weight, without motion, for the moment the air changed above it. What they uncovered wasn't built for burial. The proportions were wrong, neither tomb nor temple, and the incline of the passage had no symmetry with ancient design. Inside, the light failed long before the walls did. Carvings emerged from the dark only when brushed with fingers. The symbols were not alphabetic, not pictographic. They looped and curled but never repeated. Across one surface ran a line that appeared to track the sun, except the intervals defied the calendar, measuring something not tied to solstice or equinox. No known culture claimed it. A week passed before the team agreed to document it officially. The language on the tablets resisted encoding. Photographs blurred at the edges. Rubbings came away with marks that didn't match the originals. Not corrupted, reordered. As if the act of copying altered the content. One assistant left the site abruptly. Gave no reason. Left his journals behind. Inside, pages filled with phonetic guesses, frustrated attempts at mapping sound to shape. One phrase appeared repeatedly, translated differently each time. None matched. When funding stalled, the excavation froze. The chamber was sealed under regulation. Artifacts boxed, catalogued, stored without analysis. No articles followed. The lead archaeologist died 2 winters later. Heart failure during a lecture on Neolithic religious symbology. The last slide in his presentation showed a glyph from the dig, mislabeled as Canaanite influence. No one corrected him. Years passed. Access restricted. Files misfiled, photographs degraded, field reports left to yellow. Among them, a manila envelope sealed in tape. No title. Only the name of the lead and a 6-digit number. Inside, carbon copies of transcription attempts, one margin scrawled with a note. These aren't symbols. They're instructions. The envelope surfaced decades later. Not in an archive, but folded into a donation box sent to a university library during renovations. By chance, it landed in the hands of someone who knew the shape of the thing before the meaning. Not from study, but from sound. The phrase on the carbon copy matched the last word spoken on a tape brought from a school in Wales. Not similar. Identical. Down to the phoneme. He didn't sleep that night either. Not from fear, but recognition. Something not taught. Something recalled. The recordings changed without warning. No new equipment, no shift in location. Same worn cassette, same quiet room. Yet the voice came lower, slower, drawn from a place sleep couldn't reach but never left. The sounds emerged long after midnight, always in fragments, always during the breath between dreams and waking. They came as if summoned by silence itself. There were no pauses for thought, no hesitation in tone. Each syllable pressed against the next with certainty, like a sentence remembered rather than spoken. Patterns surfaced again, the same endings, the same inflected shifts, but something else threaded between them. Variant. Cases not accounted for in the dig. Markers that bent the grammar without breaking it, like roots beneath a structure thought complete. He charted them, mapped the old transcripts against the new speech, ran overlays, checked cadence against phonemic drift. Every linguistic instinct warned him, this shouldn't happen. Languages erode. Complexity collapses. Systems simplify. But this one reversed the rule. What emerged wasn't a descendant, it was refinement. Older. Cleaner. Unblemished by use or confusion. The girl never saw the document. Never read the stone rubbings. Yet in her sleep, she corrected what had taken scholars years to misinterpret. She conjugated verbs left unfinished in the Anatolian fragment. Applied tenses that matched none of the known cases. Built compounds that mirrored a syntax guessed at by dead men, but never proven. One passage matched a funerary inscription from the sealed chamber. 4 glyphs long. The pronunciation she used deviated from the assumed translation, but the deviation resolved a contradiction in the original grammar, transforming the phrase from an incomplete metaphor into a precise temporal clause. He played it back again. Slower this time. Each sound pressed into tape hiss. Each intonation wrapped around meaning so dense he could feel it behind his teeth before understanding caught up. No hesitation. No translation. Just the memory of a grammar that should not have survived. Not in records. Not in breath. She had begun humming between sentences. Soft intervals that matched none of the words. But they weren't tuneless. They carried scale, measured distance, a tonal map of emphasis, intonation coded not by mood but by order. Music, not for the sake of sound, but structure. One night, the pitch of her hum aligned with a consonantal drop that appeared only once in the Anatolian tablet. A sound assumed decorative, placeholder, but her voice weighted it differently, treated it as terminal, a marker of completion. He reclassified it. The language no longer resembled a relic. It spoke like origin, not the version trapped in carved stone, but what came before, what the carvers had once heard and tried to preserve with hands that didn't remember the sound. This girl didn't reconstruct. She recalled. In the margin of his notebook, beside a line he could no longer source, he wrote one sentence without accents or academic caution. The stones recorded what was left. She speaks what came first. The drawings began with chalk on the underside of the porch. Pale circles nested inside angled lines, repeating like constellations that hadn't been charted. At first, they were mistaken for childish loops, the kind that come from boredom or mimicry. But the spacing was too clean. No overlap. No correction. Each mark committed from the first stroke, as though recalled rather than invented. She moved on to paper only when the porch had no more room. Pages went missing from schoolbooks, filled not with sentences but symbols. Even the margins were used. Thin ink pressed into the fibers so hard that it bled through. Her father noticed first. Not the symbols themselves but the rhythm of it. She drew only in silence. Not even the sound of breathing could be heard when she worked. While cleaning, he opened the closet looking for a missing coat. Buried behind shoes, beneath a box of photographs and one winter glove, he found the book. Wax paper wrapped around it, held with twine that frayed at the knot. The cover was smoke-dulled, but intact. No title. No publisher's mark. Hand-stitched binding. He opened it expecting a journal. Instead, the first page held a single symbol, etched in black that had gone gray at the edges, like ash pressed into cotton. The paper itself wasn't paper. Rougher, fibrous. Some kind of handmade pulp. He turned the pages slowly. No dates. No margin lines. Just glyphs, always centered. Some pages sparse. Others dense. No pattern he could follow. The writing looked written by more than one hand. Some letters thin and angled. Others thick, blunt, smeared into the grain. In the middle section, the writing stopped. Instead, there were lists. Rows of what looked like names, each with a smaller line beneath it. Some scratched out, others faded beyond recovery. Near the back, symbols returned, but sharper this time, almost geometric. On the final page, the ink had pooled in a corner, as if spilled. Yet the pattern emerged anyway. A repeated motif. Angular crosspoints inside a ring. Familiar. He didn't recognize it until he saw the printout left on the kitchen counter days earlier. A carving from the Anatolian chamber, pulled from an old field photo. The match was precise. Not similar. Identical. Down to the line breaks and the arc ratio. He set the book down, wrapped it again, but the weight didn't leave his hands. The room felt smaller, as if the air hadn't agreed with its removal. He asked his wife later if she'd bought it at a market. She shook her head. Never seen it. The child offered no explanation when asked. Only watched him from the hallway with an expression too calm for her age, hands still covered in ink, a page folded in her pocket. That night, he heard her speaking softly in her room. No emotion. No hesitation. The words matched nothing he knew. But he didn't need translation. Something in the tone suggested neither question nor story. It sounded like a list. Not of people. Not of places. Of roles. Assignments. A language with no country still gave orders. He placed the book in a drawer the next morning, turned the key, and told no one what he'd found beneath the final binding stitch. A second layer of paper, hidden between the cover and the first page. On it, drawn in thicker ink, was the same phrase he'd heard her whisper 3 nights earlier while asleep, unaware, face turned toward the wall. A phrase no one had taught her. No one had written down. Yet here it was, waiting beneath a cover no one remembered acquiring. The message was brief. A name, an address, and 5 words. Do not bring recordings. Come alone. No signature, but the handwriting belonged to someone who no longer trusted their voice. The envelope had no return stamp, just a faint discoloration at one edge as if it had sat near heat for too long. The house stood at the edge of a forgotten borough where the streets had names but no signs. Shrubs pressed up against chain-link fences, the paint on the windows dulled to the color of stone. Curtains stayed drawn even in the middle of the afternoon. The door opened before a knock was given. No greeting. Only a nod and the sound of locks closing again behind them. The man inside had once lectured on symbology at the university in Ankara. Not a name that carried weight in journals, but one known to anyone who ever read the preliminary field notes from the Anatolian chamber. He had disappeared from the academic circuit 2 decades earlier without explanation. No obituary. No retirement announcement. Just silence. He led the way down a hallway lined with closed doors. In the back room, papers lay across the floor, not scattered but placed, as if arranged for some internal logic no one else could read. Light came from a single bulb held aloft by cord. On the far wall, symbols painted by hand. Not copied. Reconstructed. Some matched the dig. Others had never been published. When shown the phonetic mapping, he didn't ask where it came from. Only studied the notations, fingers tracing over each line like prayer beads. At one point, his mouth parted slightly, but no sound emerged. The page with the funeral clause held him longest. He stared at the final morpheme for nearly a minute before folding the paper closed and setting it aside, face down. He gestured toward the wall, where one symbol sat isolated from the rest, encircled twice. Said nothing at first, only placed a finger beside it. Then spoke with the tone of someone who had tried too long to forget something that refused to vanish. Others had followed the same signs. One by one, they traced the origin backward, past the tablets, past the oral fragments, beyond the reach of recorded language. Some wrote. Others abandoned their work. A few simply disappeared. He listed them not as warnings, but as facts. Names without embellishment. Dates without comment. His voice lowered when describing the last to try. A woman who believed the symbols encoded not sound, but something older, an architecture of cognition, a shape for memory itself. She stopped speaking months before her disappearance. When colleagues visited, they found her notes burned in the fireplace, save for one page left untouched on her desk. The glyph at the center was the same one spoken in a child's dream. He stood and walked to a drawer beneath the painted wall. Opened it slowly. Inside, a piece of parchment so thin it cracked when touched. On it, written in faded black, a sentence in phonetic form. Beneath it, a translation in a different hand. It remembers who listens longest. His eyes held no emotion when he spoke again. Only a resignation too worn to be fear. You don't find the origin, he said. It comes when it's ready, and it will use whoever hears it clearly. Not everyone hears it the same, but those who do don't forget. Outside, the air held the smell of copper and dust. Inside, the symbol remained untouched on the wall, the paint faded but unbroken. The man never asked for the research notes to be returned. Never asked for a name, or the recordings, or where the child had come from. He only repeated one thing before the door shut behind his guest. It wants to be remembered. Whether you agree or not is no longer part of the question. The rain had fallen for 6 days without pause. Soil gave way in the early hours before light returned, splitting the hillside in silence. No thunder, no rupture, only a slow descent of earth peeling itself open. Beneath the surface, stone met daylight for the first time in thousands of years. Not a wall, not a ruin. A perimeter, cut into the slope with angles that had not dulled, corners that defied erosion. The entrance stood intact, half buried, like it had waited for the moment terrain forgot to hold it back. News reached no one official at first. A shepherd found it, lost a lamb, traced its prints through mud, stopped when his boot hit granite where there should have been clay. He called no one, said nothing. 2 days later, drone footage leaked to a satellite imaging board tasked with monitoring flood risk. One technician paused over the frame long enough to mark a shape that had no natural cause. A circle, faint but perfect, surrounded by stone that had no quarry match in the region. The footage surfaced on a closed forum meant for architectural forensic. A screen captured still made its way to an inbox marked Archival Anomaly Review. It traveled by accident. It was opened by someone who remembered the glyphs painted on the wall of a house where the doors stayed locked. By the time the site was formally reported, the mud had dried in ridges. Dust clung to the carvings but did not obscure them. Every symbol remained crisp, unweathered. No moss. No lichen. Just markings cut too cleanly for stone that old. Inside, the air pressed inward. No rot. No decay. Just dryness too complete to belong in open space. The floor sloped inward to a depression encircled by raised symbols. No repetition. Each mark singular. Grammar forms, not decorations. Declarative structures embedded in rock, circling an altar of circular design, low to the ground, unmarred by damage or time. The language matched what had been recorded in dreams, intonation carried through geometry. No phonetic guesswork required. The curvature of the carvings corresponded to breath length. Placement corresponded to stress. One phrase returned across several surfaces, always positioned near entrances, thresholds, places of transition. The translation formed slowly. Word by word, sound by sound. Final meaning held until the syntax settled into clarity. We are the first to forget. Not a warning. Not a lament. A record. Statement of identity. An admission older than inscription, predating the act of writing itself. There were no bodies inside. No offerings. No remnants of worship or occupation. Just grammar, language placed where memory was meant to last longer than stone. The same phrase appeared once more beneath the altar, etched so shallow it required angled light to read. A variant barely different. We are not the last. It had never been published. Not yet. Not formally. But a copy had already made its way into notes folded into a locked drawer. It had already been spoken by a voice far younger than the ruins. Spoken not once, but twice in sleep. Not performed. Recalled. The shape of the phrase had not changed across centuries. What had changed was who remembered it first. The last English word came without warning. Spoken across a kitchen table during breakfast, simple, casual, unnoticed at first. Hours passed. The silence felt ordinary. Only later, when a question was asked and answered with something neither guessed nor known, did the change reveal itself. Not chosen. Not rehearsed. Complete. Conversations became recordings. Notebooks replaced speech. Pages filled before sunrise, margins consumed with notations too fine to trace. Not repetition. No compulsive loops. Each symbol born of placement, each stroke layered with direction. The ink bled through the paper onto the desk, onto her hands, onto the windowsill where she wrote when no one else could sleep. Language no longer functioned as translation. It had become setting. Identity. Memory. The shift was not sudden, yet nothing remained of what had come before. School lessons returned blank. Familiar names held no weight. But the eyes carried something unchanged, an awareness not rooted in personhood, but recall. She was not absent. She was elsewhere. What emerged on the pages resisted classification. Not a cipher. Not script. Shapes mirrored orbital paths, nested sequences that matched lunar transitions across cycles forgotten by modern almanac. She mapped months not by date but by shadow alignment, marked seasons not by solstice but by signal, lights unseen by present instruments, but plotted once in stone long buried. Constellations reappeared. Not the ones taught to children or printed on charts. These held different names. Short. Monosyllabic. Titled not for gods or animals but for functions. Intervals. Passage points. Celestial phrases embedded in sky shapes no longer visible from Earth's current axial tilt. Some only appear once every precessional cycle. Others never return. Yet she charted them with precision. No telescope. No lens. Just graphite pressed to paper in lines as exact as machine renderings. He watched without comment. Not from fear. Not disbelief. He understood too well the line that had been crossed. This wasn't pathology. Not trauma. Not invention. It was reduction. Not disappearance but compression. A narrowing of voice until only what had once spoken before culture, before syntax, remained. Sleep became incidental. She wrote in dreams, scrawled across bedding, scratched into wooden floorboards, chalked onto walls where sunlight never touched. Always the same grammar. Variants appeared. Past tense conjugations for actions outside linear time. Pronouns adapted for collective memory. Verbs for recognition that preceded language. Terms for forgetting with no equivalent in modern speech. He tried, once, to ask a question. No reaction. Only a gaze held long enough to register but not respond. The pause wasn't absence. It was replacement. An older awareness had taken form, one that understood the question but regarded it irrelevant. She did not regress. She did not forget. What spoke through her was not possession, but memory resurfaced. Not imposed. Reclaimed. What changed most was the silence. It deepened. Not emptiness, but weight. Rooms she entered grew quiet without effort. Not out of reverence. Out of recognition. Something older had returned to its own name. And it no longer required translation. The real had been stored without care. Dust across the case, a label half-peeled, handwriting faded to the shade of bone. It had been recorded during a pediatric intake, background filled with the rustle of forms, a soft voice coaxing cooperation. What was captured, unintentionally, came not as response but interruption. A phrase spoken without prompt, in a tone that didn't match the room or the moment. No cry. No babble. Just 6 syllables spoken with breath unbroken. At the time, no one remarked on it. A notation was made, language development advanced, early verbal structuring. The phrase was transcribed phonetically, miscategorized, buried beneath assessments that measured progress by benchmarks too modern to detect anomaly. Years passed before the real surfaced again. Found among archived family materials, digitized during a project unrelated to the child. It played low through speakers with poor range, the tape warping on the second rotation, but the phrase remained intact. He paused the file, rewound, marked the timestamp, played it again. The spacing between syllables matched something he'd only just encountered, etched into stone beneath the altar where dust had refused to settle. He retrieved the scan, enlarged the glyph, compared each curve to the transcription. There was no variation. The tomb bore a warning too old for preservation, and she had spoken it before her mouth could form full sentences. At first, he assumed coincidence, repetition by chance, but the recordings didn't stop at one instance. He found another, buried in a home video where the camera focused on a birthday cake. The voice came from off-frame. The same phrase, same tempo, no inflection shift, no childish lilt. Identical, 6 syllables, 12 seconds apart from the first, separated by years. Spoken without context. He built a timeline, marked the dates. Every occurrence fell into alignment, 13 days between them. Always 13. No missed cycles. Not one. She had been speaking it since the age of 2. Not randomly. With schedule. Unnoticed. Unrecognized. As though it wasn't for those around her, but for something waiting beyond hearing. A call not meant to be understood, only remembered. The warning etched beneath the altar read with no ambiguity. Not metaphor. Not metaphor dressed in poetry. Direct statement. Do not return what was buried. The language offered no variance for conditionals, no exceptions. The structure lacked negotiation. Its grammar reserved no form for persuasion. The phrase did not ask. It reminded. She had spoken it with a calm impossible to mimic. Not performance. Not imitation. As though she was not the speaker, but the conduit. The voice for something that had spoken once long ago and refused to change its rhythm. He set the reel aside. Listened to the phrase a final time without taking note. Nothing in the tone changed. No emotion carried. Only the weight of repetition, as though the world had failed to listen the first time and the words had waited, counting days between breath and silence, to begin again. The window was open when they found the room. Nothing broken. No forced lock. Curtains untouched, moving slightly, pulled by wind that hadn't passed through the valley since the previous season. Bed made. Shoes by the door. Desk left as it always had been, except for the journal resting at the center, spine cracked, one page visible. The sentence wasn't long. Ink bled slightly at the ends of each letter. No salutation. No sign-off. Just a line written 5 times across the paper, each version darker than the last. I remembered what they asked me to forget. The wardrobe stood open. Clothes untouched. Drawers filled. No luggage missing. No prints beyond those already expected. The floor beneath the window held no mark of weight, no indication of descent. Just dust undisturbed. Her absence left no rupture. No alarm was raised that night. Voices lowered in confusion, not panic. The kind of disappearance that felt more like omission than loss, as if a page had been skipped in a story too old to start again. Nothing else surfaced. No sightings. No messages. Authorities filed reports out of obligation, not hope. Those who knew her stopped searching after the first season passed without answer. The journal remained with the one person who had understood what had been spoken before it was ever written. Years moved forward without change. In a dry field outside a village in northern Greece, a boy no older than 5 began marking shapes in the dust. Not drawings. Not games. Symbols, etched with the blunt end of a spoon, paced evenly, pressed deeply. A teacher noticed the patterns during recess, photographed them, searched for comparison. Nothing matched in local tradition. No alphabet bore resemblance. The photos were uploaded to a forum dedicated to undeciphered languages. One member responded within minutes. The symbol at the center matched an altar carving unearthed during an unauthorized excavation nearly 4 decades prior, documented briefly before the chamber was resealed under directive from an unlisted board. The child gave no explanation. Spoke the shapes aloud while drawing. Same cadence. Same breath control. The recordings, taken by his mother in secret, revealed phonetic structures matching those catalogued by a linguist who had disappeared from public records without formal retirement or obituary. When asked where the symbols came from, the boy responded only once. The phrase was short. Not a sentence. A reminder. Spoken without hesitation. They left it with me. There had been no story told to him. No images shown. No exposure to anything beyond the usual. Yet each mark carried proportion, grammar, purpose, like the memory of something not seen, but held. Something waiting through silence until the shape of the voice returned. Nothing in the soil suggested history. No ruins nearby. No reason for the words to appear again. Yet they had. Drawn by hands too young to fake lineage. Spoken by someone who had never read what had been written in a journal no longer mentioned. The inheritance was not genetic, not spiritual, not given through blood or belief. It passed in intervals, by rhythm, by alignment. It did not require permission. Only memory. Memory that could not be erased, only delayed. Memory that would return when the world forgot it still belonged to someone. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.